Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. My name is Jeremy Nettles. I'm the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana. You're welcome to get in touch with us by phone at 812-550-6234, or you could send an email to info@riverridgechurch.org, and we would love to hear from you. And I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/River Ridge Church of Christ. And if you go there, you can find a live stream each time that we gather for our worship services. We've been looking at the whole Bible, and we started with big overviews, and we focused down more and more narrowly. And now we're generally looking at a book at a time, but when there are multiple books that fit together really nicely, like recently we looked at 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, all in a row, well, we tend to do those together. That's what we're doing this morning on the show. The books, the Old Testament books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. Now, I'll warn you at the outset that this is going to be a little bit less linear approach than I usually try to cultivate. The books of Samuel, they do have major points, but much more than that, they're kind of a list of, and then this happened, after which this other thing occurred, and then so-and-so did this. So we're going to go through this storytelling, this narrative approach, and we will find a handful of useful lessons for us today along the way. And then at the end, I'll try to bring it all together and wrap it up in a nice tidy bow as we finish. So, let's start with the name of these books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Does that reflect the author? Did Samuel write these? Well, no, because the title character, Samuel, dies well before part 1 is over. He's not even really the main character. In fact, the main character, I suppose, in as much as there is one, would be David. 1st and 2nd Samuel are focused on him. Even when it's not directly about him, it is a history of his, not just his life, but his reign and how that came about. So there's an awful lot of background. And so to establish the background, we talk first about Samuel, hence the title of the books, because, well, he's the first main character who appears. That gives way later to the first king of Israel, Saul, and then he in turn gives way to David, who will occupy the rest of 1 Samuel and the rest of 2 Samuel as well. So why does it do this? Why, if it's about David, why don't we just focus on David? Well, if you want to understand David, then you're going to have to cover Saul. And if you want to understand Saul, then you're going to have to cover Samuel. Samuel occupies about the first 12 chapters of 1 Samuel, and he's not dead by chapter 12, but he loses the spotlight about at that point. And then Saul takes the spotlight away, really starting at about chapter 9 and going through about chapter 15. Again, he's not dead yet by that point, but he more or less loses the spotlight. And then David occupies, well, about chapter 16 of 1 Samuel through, well, the end of 2 Samuel, chapter 24. The books of Samuel are important just for history, to understand what happened, but also for life lessons that come from that history. More importantly, though, it all works together to foreshadow, using type and antitype, that sort of thing, to point toward Christ. But it starts, before we can get to that point, with Hannah and her son-to-be, Samuel. Let's start in chapter 1, verse 1. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim in the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. You can probably guess how this is going to start. Hannah is depressed because she has no children, and she feels like a great purpose in her life has been left unfulfilled. Jump down to verse 11. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. Well, God gives her what she requested, a son, and his name is Samuel. And Hannah keeps the vow that she had made and dedicates Samuel to the Lord. And this looks forward to another extraordinary conception, followed by a lifelong dedication to the Lord. Well, Samuel grows up and ends up the judge of Israel. We can see this in 1 Samuel chapter 7, beginning in verse 3. And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah, and drew water, and poured it out before the Lord, and fasted on that day, and said there, We have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. Skipping forward to verse 15, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would return to Ramah, for his home was there, and there also he judged Israel. And he built there an altar to the Lord. So we skipped over quite a few years there, but nevertheless we see how Samuel is the judge, and things sound like they're pretty good, but they're not going to stay that way forever, because chapter 8, verse 1, When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. And the name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah, and they were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. That's a common problem. Actually, we saw this earlier in the book with the priest Eli and his sons, too. His sons did not particularly care about being righteous or keeping God's law or being good representatives of God for the people. Do we see anything like that today? Yes, all the time. And I suppose that highlights one of our most common failures, to adequately teach and properly raise our children. And it's not just about giving them the information and the rules, but also the reasons and the motivations, and showing them the alternatives and why those are evil and lead to death and misery. Parenting is hard, and we are inclined to just take for granted that our kids will grow up and be just like us. And sometimes that's the problem. They grow up and they're just like us. But other times, well, we raise rebels. We just raise rebels. We do our best, we teach them the best we can, and no matter how good a job we do, even if we do everything perfectly, they still have to make their own decisions. And whether it's because we didn't adequately prepare them, or just because they rebel against us and against God, we can't force them. Unfortunately, this won't be the last time that we see this theme in the books of Samuel. There are plenty of admonishments for parents today to be found in these books. Well, the people are obviously upset at the situation that that Samuel's sons have not followed in his footsteps. Verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel, when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, Obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. This is tragic. And I hate using that word because we have diluted it to mean anything bad. But tragic is not just bad. It's tragic because, well, they got themselves into this situation. It's not entirely their fault that Samuel's children have not followed in his footsteps and have not been good judges, but, well, they're the ones who keep disregarding God and his laws. God designed for them a loose confederation of tribes and said, I will give you this inheritance that I promised to your father Abraham all these generations ago, and I will give you a law, and I will let you live and govern yourselves. And the 613 commandments that he gave them, well, that seems like an awful lot, but I challenge you to compare the law of Moses to the U.S. Code, for example, which is significantly more difficult to comprehend, let alone keep. So here God gave them a relatively simple, straightforward, and free society. And how did they handle it? Well, Judges 17:6 tells us, In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's not a good thing. It's not a compliment. Every time that phrase or a version of it is repeated in the last few chapters of Judges, it's tied with a story of brutality and a falling away, not just from God's instructions to the Israelites, but from his basic expectations of humanity. They turned it into a disaster area when it could have been, well, almost a paradise. It's the consequence of sin, and it's still the way things are in a world that includes free will. Despite Samuel's warning, the people of Israel insist, and God gives them what they want, good and hard. And who's the king? Saul. Chapter 9 introduces Saul, and we find him retrieving his father's donkeys, so that's an auspicious beginning, I guess. But, I mean, at least it does show Saul's relative humility, his humble origins, and his filial piety, and, carrying out his father's wishes. It shows relatively good character. This is not a guy whose ambitions include ruling the nation. Well, he's pressed into service, and he's anointed king, and then we find chapter 11, verse 1... Then Nahash the Ammonite went and besieged Jabesh-Gilead, and the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you. But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, On this condition I will make a treaty with you, that I gouge out all your right eyes, and thus bring disgrace on all Israel. The elders of Jabesh said to him, Give us 7 days' respite, that we may send messengers through all the territory of Israel. Then, if there is no one to save us, we will give ourselves up to you. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the ears of the people, and all the people wept aloud. Now behold, Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen. And Saul said, What is wrong with the people, that they are weeping? So they told him the news of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of oxen, and cut them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of the messengers, saying, Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. This is followed by a quick, decisive battle, and things end well, but did you notice that the king was at home plowing the fields personally? This is not a guy who is living high on the hog in his palatial mansion off of the nation's taxes. This is amusingly humble. But Saul grows into his role. He's certainly done a great job militarily here in chapter 11, and as he grows into his role, begins to like it. And then he begins to turn away from God, because so often power corrupts. And that is another lesson for us today. Expect people to be corrupted by power. It's very rare to avoid this. And that also means you should think twice about seeking out power for yourself. Well, God demonstrates our bad taste in leaders through Saul's descent from humble and benevolent monarch to malicious, immoral ruler, and then he picks someone better. Chapter 16. The Lord said to Samuel, How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil, and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. Jump down to verse 6. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look on his appearance, or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by. And he said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord has not chosen these. Then Samuel said to Jesse, Are all your sons here? And he said, There remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, Send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. After this, we find David in service to his king, Saul. He's playing the lyre in order to soothe Saul's harmful spirit, which illustrates the power of music, but that's another topic. He becomes one of Saul's armor bearers, but he's also splitting his time between Saul and his father's sheep, and that brings us to chapter 17, where he goes to check on his brothers on the battle lines, and hears about a giant named Goliath. I probably don't have to tell that story, but David, as a result of killing the giant, ends up as Saul's son-in-law. And Saul becomes quite jealous. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. Well, that didn't last long. It must have been a pleasant Thanksgiving dinner at that table, I guess. Well, Jonathan is actually a great friend of David's, and with Jonathan's help, David evades Saul's wrath. And David ends up on the run. He ends up in the wilderness. Sometimes he ends up hanging out with the Philistines, who are Israel's enemies. He's sort of a benevolent outlaw and folk hero in this period, twice giving up easy opportunities to kill Saul in 1 Samuel 24 and again in chapter 26. Remember, Saul is David's father-in-law. David doesn't want to kill his father-in-law. let alone the anointed king over his country. Well, Saul chasing after David doesn't last forever because Saul has other responsibilities to manage, and some of those include defending his nation, and he goes to battle with the Philistines, and in chapter 31, he dies, along with Jonathan and some of his other sons in battle with the Philistines. And we find David mourning, not just his friend Jonathan, but his father-in-law, his king, who has been out after his life for such a long time. That's in 2 Samuel chapter 1. And then we find him being crowned king in 2 Samuel 2. After this David inquired of the Lord, Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, Go up. David said, To which shall I go up? And he said, To Hebron. So David went up there, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel, and Abigail the son of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, every one with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. So it's not quite the same thing as being king of Israel, but he's at least recognized king by one tribe, and a pretty big one, so that's something. We can see what a fraught situation this could be, because the nation recognized Saul as king, and you would expect for the monarchy to then devolve to one of his sons. Now his heir Jonathan has died, and so have others of his sons, but there are still descendants of Saul's left, and people are going to naturally gravitate toward one of them, and not necessarily be too happy when David, even though he is a son-in-law of the king, seeks to step in. They might look at him as a usurper. And David does a great job of showing himself as the benevolent monarch. He shows mercy. He shows clemency to even opponents of his reign, even those who helped out with his enemy. David goes beyond what could be required. He honors and blesses some who must have thought that he would be very angry at them for their loyalty to his predecessor. But it's not all about David. In 2 Samuel 2, verse 8, But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead and the Asherites, and Jezreel, and Ephraim, and Benjamin, and all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So that conflict is not over yet, and the war is going to continue through chapter 4 with a reluctant David pursuing the war and a significantly less reluctant class of David's underlings. Joab, especially, David's the commander of his army, is happy to do murder if it improves David's standing, as well as Joab's own. But finally, in chapter 5, David is crowned king over all Israel, and in chapter 6, he conquers the city of Jerusalem for the Israelites again, and brings the Ark of the Covenant there and sets it up as his capital. And, well, all of those things are going to be pretty important for the future. As you might know, Jerusalem is still kind of an important place. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, let's begin in verse 1. Now when the king lived in his house, and the Lord had given him rest from all his surrounding enemies, the king said to Nathan the prophet, See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent. And Nathan said to the king, Go, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you. Well, you can see the direction that this is headed, and you can see the implications, especially to Jerusalem today and what is called the Temple Mount. But, well, we're not quite done. Verse 4. But that same night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, Go and tell my servant David, Thus says the Lord, Would you build me a house to dwell in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. In all places where I have moved with all the people of Israel, did I speak a word with any of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, Why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, Thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more, as formerly from the time I appointed judges over my people Israel. And I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled, and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. Well, that seems pretty important, and there are some immediate implications of that David's son is going to build a house for God at Jerusalem. This happens to be a son who is yet unborn at the time of this prophecy, but nevertheless there it is. There are also some long-term implications, like the fact that David's dynasty is going to last in a way that Saul's did not. And then there are some longer-term implications, like the fact that the Messiah is going to come through the line of David. And one of the names for the Messiah is Son of David, for a reason. Jesus is called that many times in the Gospels. Jesus also would build a house, in a manner of speaking, for God. He also would establish an eternal throne, and he also would be called a Son of God. In fact, the Son of God. Well, that all sounds great, and in chapters 8 through 10 we have David's glorious reign, but there's still a lot left of this book, and I'm afraid it's not exactly a happily ever after situation. 2 Samuel 11, verse 1. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent to Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers, and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. Well, that was a really bad idea. First of all, he's breaking the 7th commandment, you shall not commit adultery. He's also breaking the 10th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. We could throw in the 9th commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. It's not exactly what's going on, but in the course of events here, he lies in order to try to cover this up. And then finally, the 6th commandment, you shall not murder. He's not the one who pulls the trigger, so to speak, but, I mean, it's on his order that Uriah gets killed. 4 of the big 10 commandments? Come on, David! Also, Uriah is a trusted and loyal officer of his. This is not very friendly behavior of David. And really, can he not foresee the likely results of this behavior? Even if he's not all that concerned about the moral implications, which is weird for a man after God's own heart, it's just not very smart. But how many men have been undone by lust? That problem is not going away, and it's something that we need to guard against today as well. Everything just falls apart from there. The child who is born of this union dies in chapter 12. Later on, his other kids, David's other children, fight amongst themselves and rape amongst themselves and kill amongst themselves, while David stands by and just watches it all happen without really stepping in to do anything about it. One of his sons, Absalom, who is next in line, although he's not exactly the firstborn, but he's next in line for the throne, and he revolts against his father and usurps his father's throne and drives him out of Jerusalem and tries to kill him. Which, considering David's reputation as a man of war, seems like it'd be a bad idea, but no, it's actually close. Well, having recovered his throne from that ordeal, David soon faced another rebellion under a man named Sheba, and that was also put down. There's more trouble coming, this time from Joab, who is his commander. He still doesn't deal with this guy the way he should and enforce the law. Instead, he gives the guy a pass for being his cousin, for being a really effective general. It's probably a combination of the two. David makes so many mistakes, and there are so many problems, and we're skipping most of that, partly for the sake of time, and partly because it's just so depressing to read it all, and then partly because it was mostly ironed out by the end of David's life. Speaking of the end of David's life, let's turn to chapter 23 and begin in verse 1. Now these are the last words of David. The oracle of David, the son of Jesse, the oracle of the man who was raised on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord speaks by me. His word is on my tongue. The God of Israel has spoken. The Rock of Israel has said to me, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. For does not my house stand so with God? For he has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secure. For will he not cause to prosper all my help and my desire? But worthless men are all like thorns that are thrown away, for they cannot be taken with the hand. But the man who touches them arms himself with iron and the shaft of a spear, and they are utterly consumed with fire. So this is a few things. It is first a wise reflection on the nature of monarchy. It also is a bunch of messianic hints, things like in verse 2, the Spirit of the Lord speaks by me, which is almost exactly the same as something that Jesus said in Luke 4:18. Now, of course, there he was quoting from Isaiah 61, but it's the same idea. We've also got the benevolent ruler, the just ruler, being like the morning dawning on people, and that seems to be recalled by Malachi 4, the sun of righteousness that rises with healing in its wings, which is looking forward to Christ. And then there's the prayer of Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, in Luke chapter 1, where verses 78 and 79 refer to the Messiah as the dawn. There's also the imagery surrounding Christ's transfiguration and his resurrection and his ascent in glory, and, well, many other representations of Jesus comparing him to the light of the sun. And in contrast to that, what happens to those who rule unjustly? As we read in verse 6, they're like thorns, which require sharp tools to cut, gather, remove from their position, and throw them in the fire to dispose of them. That's a good place for us to end, considering the alternatives presented and the promise given to Christians in Revelation 22, verse 5, they will need no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. David was talking about those who rule over men, and we are given the promise that we will reign forever and ever. Or, as an alternative, we can try to build our own petty little kingdoms here on earth, and we may start out very humbly like Saul with the best of intentions, and then turn into a merciless, jealous coward who leaves no legacy but misery and destruction. It's your choice between those two. Like David, we have all made mistakes. Some have made bigger mistakes than others. Most likely you've never stolen your friend's wife and then had her murdered, but, even if you have, you could still be remembered as a man after God's own heart, like David was, through turning away from sin, humbling yourself before God, appealing for mercy through the Son of David, who is also the Son of God, and who reigns forever on David's throne. If you're ready to make that change and to submit yourself to His will, we would love to help at River Ridge. Please get in touch with us. You can call or text us at 812-550-6234 or email us at info@riverridgechurch.org. You can also find us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh. We gather at 9 a.m. every Sunday for Bible study, 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. for worship, and 7 p.m. on Wednesdays for another study. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.